Hey everyone, this is Dina Alexander with Educate and Empower Kids. We are excited to talk to you today about dating in the digital age and preparing our kids for it. We have a guest coming on, I hope. We'll see if he comes on. It's a different time frame, so I guess maybe he's on a different time zone. Um, so what started the impetus for, or what made me want to talk about this today was talking with my kids, of course, and talking about some of the interesting trends that we're seeing in dating when it comes to kids, seeing some of the trends, seeing what their friends are saying. And it was enough to freak me out that I thought we better do a webinar on this. So I was talking with my daughter about what her friends are reporting, what she's going through, what she's seeing. And it's a lot of predatory behavior. And of course, it always makes you wonder, okay, what is going on that we're seeing this younger and younger kids preying on each other, but also cheating on each other, some of these things that we have previously only seen among adults, especially when it comes to social media, but how that has now trickled down to our teenagers, unfortunately. And so I asked her about the progression of a relationship, because that, of course, is always a concern for me as a mom. Like, our kids having sex, are they having oral sex, are they having anal sex at this very young age? And yes, and so she was like, Mom, let me tell you how a relationship starts. Okay. She says, first, you find a guy, you decide if you like him or not, you like him. Well, then you find him on Instagram or whatever social media. For her, it's Instagram. So you find them on Instagram, you stalk them on Instagram, you follow them, you follow them, and then you see if they follow you back. And that's kind of like the first step in a courtship, right? For a lot of kids. If they like you back or they follow you back, okay, that's step one. That's a good sign. Then you see if they like your posts, and then like if you like their posts. And then if things go okay, well, then you look through you want to look, as you're doing this, when you're stalking them, supposedly this is boys and girls doing this, you are looking to see if they already are involved with somebody. And I thought, okay, that's really interesting. Because these kids have now become master investigators, right? They are now seeing themselves as detectives. They're looking to see if the person is involved with anybody, right? So like my daughter said, oh yeah, there was a guy in a class that I thought was attractive, talked to him a little bit in class, looked through, and I saw that in his photos, there was some different photos with a girl. And then I also saw that there was like some flame emojis, meaning hot or something. And she was like, So I cut him off. I was done. That was a sign to me. Which to me, I was like, okay, that's all it takes, right? Is some investigative work. Whereas when we were kids, we would ask somebody, oh, what do you know about him? Oh, we would actually have to make contact verbally with this person to be able to move on in a relationship with. So to me, that was just hilarious that, what this was going to look like, anyways, it's just totally different. So then she says the next step is that you move into is you will direct message them on Instagram or whatever social media. If that goes back and forth, if that's flirtatious, then you will ask for your actual phone number to text or maybe call each other. And then she said among a lot of kids, especially if there's not a strong standard of those, there can sometimes, sex is within a few weeks. So I, of course, I heard that and I was like, well, is the research backing this up? And unfortunately, yes, the research is backing this up and is showing that this is what is going on. So I did some other research. What are the trends? How is technology changing the way our kids date? So we've already seen among college kids and other adults that dating has become so easy that it's not even happening in a lot of ways, right? You can date from your couch, as I read, as somebody said. And that I'm like, yeah, I can see that. I've heard a lot of my single friends talk about that. And also, again, because you can just easily swipe left or swipe right to determine if you want to have sex with this person and hook up. That is taking a whole courtship out of the relationship. So this is a concern for me because I want my kids to be able to have a courtship. Well, there's our guest for today. So we are talking about what is going on with the trends in dating. So what we're seeing a lot of as well among my kids, something that my kids have talked a lot about, is how these texting relationships, which have become so shallow. And my kids have commented with frustration, and I think that they admit that they themselves have done this, that their ability to communicate has decreased significantly. So we talk about that because I mentioned with my kids, like the first time my daughter had a boy that she was interested in, I let her know, this is not going to be, you cannot just text with him. You have to talk to each other on the phone. Well, my daughter is very introverted. And so for her, that was horrifying, right? The idea of having to talk on the phone every day or every couple of days was scary for her. And so one of the silly things I did was I showed her one of these books that we have used in our home. It's just the book of questions. And it has silly questions like, what would you do if you had $1 million? If you died tomorrow, what would people want to say about you? Right. And so she started using that. And within a couple of weeks, she was thanking me because she was making a connection with this boy. She was creating a friendship. It wasn't just awkward texting, right? So that was, some of what we have noticed in our home. And then what is strangely is how this is being, seen in the research. Something also that was important for me for why we wanted to have this little webinar was recently I talked to a friend of mine who had taken her daughter in for just a simple gynecological exam, and talking with the gynecologist, he said that right here in our little small town here of about 30,000 people, that in the last month, he had seen 5 cases of herpes among teenagers. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, what does this mean? And then of course I talked with my husband, who is an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And we were discussing how most of the new cases of throat cancer, there's a huge increase of that happening among teenagers. And you think, what is going on that all these teenagers are coming down with throat cancer? Well, that is because it's HPV related. Human papillomavirus, right? Which is an STD. So because of the increase in oral sex among teenagers, they're thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to get pregnant. This is the best way to have sex. This is the best, whatever. But again, this is the consequence, is because they're doing this unprotected, that we are having this huge increase. 20 years ago, HPV was only responsible for about 20% of throat cancer. Well, now it's about 50% or slightly more is HPV related. This is craziness. And this to me, of course, means that a lot of kids are getting their cues from porn and other hypersexualized media for what they think is sex or what they think a relationship is. So anywho, all right. So we are welcoming Tim Rarick from BYU, Idaho. He's a professor of family life. Correct?
Yeah, marriage, family studies, child development. Family life is a great term that captures it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tim, tell us, what are you seeing? What are some of the trends that you are seeing in research when it comes to dating and teenagers and even college kids?
Well, it's not happening. And many of the things you already touched on, it's not happening in large measure because of the technology driven. We're compartmentalizing different forms of intimacy. So in the literature, there's some great definitions of intimacy. So intimacy is multifaceted. Sometimes we think of sex as, the word sex is focused more on the physical domain, where intimacy is more holistic, the mind, body, heart, and soul of the person. And so you have teenagers and young adults who are becoming more disconnected from those things. There's an increase in oral sex because, and by the way, there's some gender specific things here too as well. Girls are more willing to give oral sex, and they don't, in fact, in his book, Girls on the Edge, Dr. Leonard Sachs talks about this trend and interviews girl after girl who says, I don't see what the big deal is. The guys like it and they'll do it. They don't see the big deal. But they get attention from the guys and that makes them feel good.
Yeah, and that unfortunately seems to be like that. That's what is enough for them, and that's what blows my mind. Is like they're okay with the fact that their sexual needs are not being met, right? Or that
right.
How many teenage boys know how to perform oral sex on a girl?
Right.
It's not happening, and so that's also like that. These girls don't even have the self-worth that to me is like the lowest common denominator, that they don't even think that they are worthy, or that they, I mean, to me, it's like, yeah, no, teenagers should not be having sex, but that they're not even going to look after their own sexual needs. Like, again, to me says, you're not ready then. Okay, sorry. What else?
No, you're absolutely right. So they're doing these things before they even have developed the other forms of intimacy. They want emotional, like the girls want it. Guys want it, but they don't understand that they want it. Girls at least know that they want emotional intimacy, feeling connected, being able to talk about feelings, hopes, dreams, thoughts, fears, all those things. Online, it becomes very fake and shallow. And if you do share those things, a lot of teens aren't even aware that they're doing it in a way so they could be seen a certain way, so they can get status, and because they think this is the persona they want. And if they live that way long enough, it pretty much, they eventually adopt that identity, and it does become them, even though it's a falsification at first. So there's the disassociating the emotional from the physical intimacy. The girls will give the oral sex, and this is not just the girls and guys issue, but I mean, if the guys are looking at porn, and on average, for the most part, statistically speaking, men and boys look at porn at much higher rates than women and girls do. Although women and girls, that number has increased. The guys are wanting to satisfy their sexual desires, and if the girls are willing to do that, in short, girls will give sex to get love, or you can put it this way: girls will give physical intimacy in hopes that they'll get emotional intimacy, and boys will give emotional intimacy in fake texting, Facebook, Instagram ways in hopes to get physical intimacy. Now they're both. So I guess what technology is doing is throwing gas on the fire, and these young people who don't even know how to form healthy relationships, they don't even know how to even get to know each other, as you said in some of your opening comments. They're perfectly happy and content with jumping straight to the physical domain, devoid of knowledge, trust, reliance, commitment, and all the other things that should come before sexual touch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like when my son, and I've talked to a lot of kids about this around the country, how nudes have become such a part of courtship now, right? That is something expected, that pressure on girls is way more than anything that you and I would have ever thought or encountered or even thought to ask for, right? But and when my kids were first mentioning that like a year ago, I kind of was like, really? Maybe that's just around here. But no, as I've gone around the country, that is that same thing, I think, of girls showing that they're willing to do that they're willing to expose themselves. And that is for the same reason, because they are expecting or hoping to get some sort of intimacy back, right? That they want some kind of attention and love. And that's just so sad. And so what can parents do to first teach their kids? We'll talk about healthy relationships in a minute, but how can we help them understand that there is a natural progression in a healthy relationship?
Well, if you don't mind, there's this book called How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk, and which is a great title. And Dr. John Van Epp, who's a professor and a marriage and family therapist, has compiled a lot of literature together. He's created this terrific model. It's called the relationship attachment model. And the basic premise is that we all, and this comes from attachment theory, we all have a sense of belongingness. Even though we talked about physical intimacy, get emotional intimacy, like want to feel progression to it. So it's just a picture of it like maybe like equalizer on a stereo where you have these different sliders. In fact, I have this thing here. And it just like you read, you go from left to right. I have to go. I'm not sure if the camera's reversing it, but
no, it's anyhow, not. It looks fine.
So it goes know, trust, rely, commit, touch, and you can see the sliders. They go down with each one. And the basic premise is you don't trust somebody more than you know them. You don't rely on them more than you trust them. You don't commit to them more than you're relying on them, and you don't touch them more than any of the rest. And what we're seeing as a trend in dating amongst teens and millennials is that the hookup culture, it's going straight to touch, and with a superficial knowledge, superficial trust, and maybe some unhealthy reliance and some haphazard or no commitment at all. Nick Mose is kind of like the diet form of that non-committal makeout. Literally, commitment is down, touch is up maybe, I don't know, a third of the way, because sexual intercourse and oral sex, that would be putting the slider all the way up to the top.
Yeah.
But I think parents, is that if they understand that, parents naturally did this, especially the digital immigrants, since most children today are digital natives. Those of us who are parents, and I am one, it was first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes a baby and a baby carriage. And part of that love was, I got to get to know the person. I've got to talk to them, face-to-face conversations. What you said about asking questions. I took my daughter on a daddy-daughter date on Friday. We went on it to a dance that our school put on. I thought that was a phenomenal thing that the school did. And I asked her some of those same questions. I was trying to get to know my daughter. And I try to teach her that when guys get to know you, these are the kind of things you discuss. And then you don't trust them more than you know them. And you have to make sure you authentically know them. And so we can give examples all the way across that. But we're seeing a trend of very little knowledge, fake trust, and a lot of touch. And that's not following that pattern. If you don't follow that pattern, then things like Tinder come and take its place.
Yeah,
Which is,
absolutely. And it's kind of like we have to be able to show them and tell them. And it's like, I love that you took your daughter on a date because you basically were showing her a progression right within the date, right? You were
yeah,
giving her an example of how a man or a boy should treat her, that it should be face-to-face conversation, that it should be a mutual discussion. It shouldn't be just a discussion about me or just a discussion about you, but that there is a progression. And that's on the
right.
micro level, even on a date, and it's on that macro level.
Yeah.
So
And I
now
had to
how,
purposely put this down while I was talking to her,
yeah.
because I wanted to make sure I was modeling this shouldn't come between us. And we had a lovely dinner together, and I put that down face down. But yeah, at the end of the day, I said to her, and her name's Naomi, Naomi, if a guy doesn't treat you like this, he is not worth your time. So you kick him to the curb. And then at the end, we did healthy touch. We walked to the door. I always open the door for her. We walked to the door, our porch, and I gave her a hug and told her how much I loved her. And there's such thing as sexual touch and non-sexual touch. And in the home, we should always be modeling the healthy touch.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it can't be devoid of know, trust, rely, or commit. So
I agree. So now, okay, so you touched on it. You started, how are we going to show them and talk to them about healthy relationships? How are we going to teach our kids to form healthy relationships and to be in one, what they look like, and then how to behave in one?
Well, the dates is one example. And I think moms should take their sons on dates. The opposite sex parent does a tremendous job of helping their child, like father, daughter, mother, son, understand what the other gender is thinking. Right? Because guys always say, I don't understand women. Well, I don't know if guys ever will, but I'll tell you, mom can do a lot of good in helping their sons understand, and vice versa for father-daughter. So I think there's a power there that needs to be tapped into and understood. What you said before about asking questions, I think we model this in the home all the time. If we're putting our technology down and saying this is a safe space, it doesn't have to be a tech-free zone, but we have limits on saying, okay, maybe this time of day we unplug. And we're modeling as parents, I have to put my phone in my closet in my room. Otherwise, I know I'll be checking it all the time. And I want my children to know I'm doing that on purpose for them. Just last night, I had an opportunity to talk with my 12-year-old daughter and have some conversations with her about her. And I was on my phone listening to a book, which isn't a bad thing, but to me, that's precious time that I could have done after she went to bed. So I think parents have to model this by saying there's a wisdom and order to these things. And we don't get rid of technology, but we do it at the right time and right place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of feel like, again, showing them and telling them, I'm putting this away. And I think it's okay to say to them, like, this is what I'm doing in this, because I think we need those reminders and they need those reminders. Because I think, like, yeah, we recognize, there was no reason for me to have my laptop out or my phone out, or I need to check it. And absolutely, it's like and I think acknowledging as parents, yeah, we're going to make mistakes, but also that, yeah, we're just as tempted as they are. Most of the, texting and driving incidents and accidents are mostly adults. It's not teenagers. They're learning, again, being those digital natives, they're learning straight up right in the middle of driver's ed over and over again. You don't text and drive, right?
Yeah.
So it's us that are basically at more of a temptation. I also think it's really important to talk to our kids about dating, what a date should look like, that we should be talking also about taking it slow. That was something one of my kids, my son actually mentioned. He was like, what do you think like parents need to, talk to their kids about? And he was like, taking it slow. He was like, everybody wants to move so fast. There's this pressure of, if you haven't had a kiss, or if you haven't done this with the girl or that with the girl within a couple days, within a few weeks, that there's something wrong. And it's like, and I agree with him. It's like they want to go right to sharing things. And it's like everything else in their lives is so instantaneous that they think
Mm-hmm.
that dating should be the same way, not realizing that we don't appreciate or love or care about anything that comes easy.
Right.
I don't know how I could possibly care about a person that did everything I wanted, or that, that I knew everything about within a day or two. My daughter talked about, because we were talking about, well, what are the advantages and disadvantages of technology? And she said, well, it's an advantage that you can meet people from far away, but also that you get to know people so quick. She was like, I have friends that they will text a boy all night long, literally back and forth all night long. And it's just like, even that, moves things so quickly versus,
Mm-hmm.
you and I, we would date somebody, we would go home, mull it over. How did
Mm-hmm.
that go? Maybe talk about it with our friends, think about it. Do I like this boy? How much do I like, but there was even having those spaces in between, again, and even with the middle schoolers, we saw so much of texting for 3 weeks and then seeing somebody, but that was considered dating. You didn't
Yeah.
see somebody for weeks, but it was still dating. So
Yeah.
again, and I like that you mentioned encouraging our kids to have face-to-face interaction. To
Mm-hmm.
me, that is so important, of that it's not just here behind a screen, or even on the phone. There's so much that we learn in a face-to-face interaction. We can
Yeah.
see that we said something dumb, or that we hurt somebody's feelings, or we can see the joy and happiness that we can help bring another
Right.
human being. Um,
Yeah.
what other final advice do you have for parents in helping their kids prepare their kids for dating in the digital age?
Well, I think you hit on a lot of key things. My son, who's 15, met a girl last year. He went down to another state and ended up meeting her at some. It was a big youth gathering, and he met her, and he's been texting her ever since. Now you have to understand, my son has a slide phone or a flip phone. He has a dumb phone, because I feel very strongly, according to the research and from what I've just seen anecdotally, even with my own students, that we have to put children through a pretty stringent process on becoming licensed to drive a car. But we'll give them a smartphone, which I think is far more dangerous at a very young age, because everybody else is doing it and that's the norm, without any training. So developmentally, we learn to sit up before we learn to crawl, before we learn to walk, before we learn to run, and so forth. And so why can't we gradually introduce technology to our children with proper rules, and then teach them about the dangers of it? And if we don't know about it, Educate Empower Kids has loads of resources so they can get to know about it. So this girl, he's been texting her a lot. And we keep encouraging, try doing a phone call. I remember being nervous when I was his age to call a girl. And I like talking. So that was a big deal for me. The other day, he talked to her for like an hour on the phone. And there's a lot more actual knowledge when I showed you get to know somebody better on the phone a lot more than you do via texting. There's just depth there you can't get. And you get to know somebody a lot more in person than you do on the phone. So I would say encourage your children, as you said, like with your daughter who's shy, encourage them to go outside of their comfort zone and teach them the why they should do that. Sometimes they have to experience the contrast. I'll ask my son, how did you feel talking to so-and-so versus how do you feel when you text so-and-so? Well, and he will recognize it. Even a teenage boy will recognize there's a difference there.
Absolutely. Yeah, but it's more fun. There's a little more depth to it.
Yeah.
So we need to finish off the webinar, but if you need more resources, we have a great lesson. It's a great family night lesson on how teaching your kids about creating healthy relationships. We also recently have updated our Sex Talks books. All 3 of them have been updated, but our 12 plus book talks about dating, talks about liking yourself, talks about intimacy, consent, all different issues, sexting, social media, tons of issues that affect our kids as they're dating, as they're living in the digital age. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. And everybody, I hope you have a great day.